Well, welcome back to Spam Humbug, the podcast of the Ultima Codex, where we talk about games, culture, and occasionally dragons. And this is kind of a soft reboot of Spam Humbug, a bit of a shift in format. Not the first one that the podcast has ever had, because, of course, when I first started it, I was just doing sort of a roundup of news stories that I didn't have time to post on the Ultima Codex, and then it became a group discussion, and it's still going to wind up being a group discussion. But want to kind of maybe shift the format a little bit and put a, not so much sort of an actual news segment, but like a little quick news commentary from me out in front of the podcast, and then move on to some sort of actual discussion towards the end of it. We had a really, really great one last night. Onus is on me to get this out the door by Friday so that I can also schedule everything to post on Saturday, Patreon, and then on the Codex proper. I suppose I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Starfield has come out, Bethesda's latest RPG, spacefaring RPG this time. Some on the Ultima Dragons Discord channel have been comparing it to No Man's Sky. Others have been arguing that that's not particularly apt. And I can see both sides of that argument, to be fair, just looking at gameplay videos for Starfield. I do note that at least the last time I looked, it is apparently Bethesda's best launch ever, having already... They've already locked in about 6 million sales of the title. It's also available for streaming on xCloud, so that's cool. So, evidently, Bethesda do have another hit on their hands. It's probably going to exceed Skyrim's insane sales numbers from several years prior. But at the same time, I can't run it, and I'm not sure that I actually have any interest in it. To be honest, I'm probably a little bit more interested in Baldur's Gate 3, which came out a little while ago as well. Larian Studios helming that one, and evidently they have done just an absolute bang-up job of capturing the feel of Dungeons & Dragons, of the setting. The engine is, essentially an iteration on Divinity Original Sin 2's engine, and so you can expect, a lot of the same interactivity and hijinks that would have characterized those games, obviously, though, using now an established setting instead of something they've invented for themselves. That said, I'm not sure I want to play Baldur's Gate 3 either, because I've complained before on this podcast at length about my struggles with combat systems where the dice roll mechanics were, if not actually presented to you, visible in sort of the way the animations and the movements of combat seem to sort of stutter a little bit. Dragon Age Origins was one that I singled out in particular for criticism in this regard. And apparently Baldur's Gate 3 has actual dice rolling mechanics that appear on screen sometimes, and it's like, I really want to like this, but I'm not sure that I can. I'm still playing Hogwarts Legacy, which is the other bit of news. I'm going to start... I've started trying to stream a little bit. I don't do the camera stuff because I'm mostly streaming off of my PlayStation these days, and I'm not set up for camera on a PS4. But still do stream on Twitch, and then that all gets posted to YouTube under the Intermittent Nonsense header. It's the name of my channel. And so those are going to start appearing as little posts on the Spam Humbug website as well. You're welcome to give me a follow. I will make sure that the Twitch links, and I guess I should probably include the YouTube channel links, are included with each stream post that hits the Codex page. At any rate, that's about all I have for news updates for the moment. I'll throw some links in the show notes to backstop all of what I just said. And without further ado, I guess let's hop on over to a discussion that I had last night, kicking off September, trying to get back into some sort of regular recording cadence. This one with Ser Dragon and Rothbard, Clortos Dragon, and also Ser's friend, Coco, about Ultima Online. I guess sort of by way of introduction then, or to lead us into the topic, and this was one that you had kind of pitched, and let me see if I have this correct, because I mean, like, in a way, this is like one of those, it's one of those things that, could wind up being a bit of a rabbit hole, but also we only have an hour, so yes. How did you put this online? In retrospect, what changes negatively affected Ultima Online, and how would you solve them with today's technology?
Yeah, so maybe including technology. I mean, it's whatever. But I always wonder, and, I think we're actually very lucky to have Ultima Online as like a case study. Because, I mean, you've got 25 or something plus years of like data and just evolution to study and observe. And so I still play. I know Coco still plays, and I'm always, just noticing things. I'm like, well, I would have done this differently because I think it would have, been better for the game. Um, or I wouldn't have done this development choice because I think it negatively affected the game in X, Y, or Z ways. So I just think about that a lot. There's only a few that really stick out in my mind, but I've got a couple, and I know I spoke to Draconi about them a ways back, and I know he was kind of interested in some of those ideas too. So I pinged him to try to see if he could join the podcast tonight, but I think he's probably busy.
As most, most VC-backed devs are, I'm sure, when they're trying to get their latest, greatest thing off the ground.
Oh,
But I will say, my experience of this discussion mostly comes from, I was one of the original moderators on the Shroud of the Avatar forums, for example, when those kicked off. And so when you say development choices that negatively impacted the game, the first image that pops to mind is a bunch of angry grognards screaming at their device that they're listening to this on, saying, "Trammel!" Because for some people, the onset of the Trammel era and the segregation of PvE and PvP was like the signally worst design choice.
I would start it right there because that's one of the big ones that's in my head. Yeah.
I was going to ask if we were going to sidestep that or not, but
No,
go
why
on.
bother?
No, there's no way you can.
Fair enough. But
I mean,
go on.
It's a big change, right? I mean, you basically took, and we can argue if it was stable in what regard, but the game had stabilized with its population on one facet, and you literally just double it, straight up double the whole thing. And so even if the rule set stayed the same, you've completely spread the peanut butter on the toast pretty thin. So it just seemed like the most aggressive and unthought of solution. It's just well, let's just copy and paste the whole game and we'll turn the PvP, boolean to false. I'm just like, really? That's what we came up, because it just seems very aggressive and unthought out to me. And so yeah, I spent a lot of time just thinking of ways that you could have, because it did, they needed to address a problem. There was a problem.
There was a problem. People are jerks online. That is the problem. We still haven't learned this.
Yeah. But it's do we really need to just basically, imprison? Well, you're kind of imprisoning both. You're taking the PvPers and you're locking them down. Anyone who doesn't want it, they're locked down somewhere else. And that's fine. They probably wanted that. But I just feel what are some other ideas? So the idea that I, usually go to, and there's several of them, is just first off, not doing that. Don't split or don't copy and paste the whole facet. Don't make Trammel. So let's say that we just kept Feluca, and you want risk and reward, and you also want comfort. All right. So I mean, we've got 8 anti-virtue dungeons and a good bit of just other dungeons throughout Britannia. Why couldn't we have town criers announce on rotation, which ones are going to have guards, posted outside their entrance, and then just rotate and guard protect the dungeons? Another big problem is, just leaving town. If you were in a town, you are mostly okay unless a thief got you. And I don't have a direct answer for that, but I'm sure there are ideas. But leaving town was a problem. And so I don't see any reason why they couldn't just guard protect roads. And, if you remember when it was earlier on in the game, you could usually go to bulletin boards and find automated quests, like someone had been kidnapped, and they would give you a direction to go in. And if you actually just wandered out into the woods, you'd find someone tied to a stake there, surrounded by orcs, and you could free them and bring them back to town for cash. I feel like you could just go to the bulletin boards or ask the town criers, what the state of the roads were. You could build quests around, getting the roads guard protected. And if the players didn't keep up with that, then kind of the Moonglow Zoo, if you don't keep up with it, the zoo population goes down. It gets a little lamer over time. And then maybe you would be going down the road and you would see perhaps a ransacked caravan maybe a couple NPC bodies, and you knew that the guard protected area of the roads was about to have a gap. And then you had to make a choice whether or not to just run down the road that wasn't protected to the other side. Maybe it's like 4 or 5 screens worth of open road, or do you head into the woods in case there's, bandits or reds or PvPers on the roads waiting? So you get a little bit of a thrill and maybe a choice. Or if you really don't, if that's really not cutting it, you still had recalls back then. You got to utilize the modes of transportation that you really had, and so you got to wonder, like, what was the real problem with PvP? Most of it, I think, was just people trying to do normal things and then being forcefully exposed to PvP. So just, you could just turn off fighting in homes. That was a big problem. Getting killed, you lose your keys, you lost your whole house. We fixed the key problem, so let's just fix the fighting in homes, because even when they split the facets and they made private homes, you still had problems where people could cast like meteor shower on like a goat that was near your house, but the AoE would still kill you. And so if you could just find a way to fix that in just those small areas where people just really aren't even out and about and they're exposed to PvP, I think that would have been a better decision. I liked the idea of rotating dungeons, because then you knew on a given day which dungeon you could go to. There would be guards posted outside. It's protected. You could have your fun there. You could do your quests in that dungeon. And if you wanted more gold or maybe some better loot, take the risk and try to go to a deep level on an unprotected one. And then you could do, I think that's that same thing with, roads.
I mean, Shroud of the Avatar sort of attempted to do something like this, because they basically created, they kind of went at it from the opposite direction. Most of the world is PvE, but there are certain zones that are open PvP, right? Like you go into it and you just, you take your risk, like you say.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm actually playing Shroud of the Avatar right now. I felt like checking in, and whenever you go, so on the open world map, I mean, your combat is extremely limited. Which you could make that, even though there's no transition in UO between town and world map, you could do something like that too. And then when you come across a point in the road where there is a bandit, I mean, then you have the choice to either rush that bandit and fight them, or you can go off the road and it's slower, it takes you longer, but you can just circumvent it. And then yeah, if you see any zone on there, I mean, they're clearly marked that it's PvP or not. And they've done some further work in Shroud now too, to where you can have PvP enabled, but there's no ransom. So the whole kind of reward part of PvP is out. It just becomes basically a skill fight, and you don't really lose anything.
Fair enough. I mean, as you're saying all of this, and like a lot of these are absolutely great ideas, but it strikes me that, and again, like I'm looking at it more from other facets of online human interaction, social media or whatever. Although that is a very, good and recent example, is that, you create something, right? You create an area where people can interact in a particular context. And then people start interacting, and then some people are jerks. And it's, it's usually not the majority of them. It's usually a smaller minority, but they have an outsized impact, right? Because they kind of are what gets noticed. And then on top of that, the initial response is it's the pendulum swing, right? It's like, okay, well, we've created this thing, but now we have this problem, and maybe it's, we have an outsized sense of what the problem is, but our reaction to the problem is a complete swing in the total opposite direction. And, so now we've created something that is maybe over moderated and too restrictive. And now we're trying to come back to something in the middle, but of course nobody can quite agree on exactly what the middle is.
Yeah. And again, we've got just like so many, feels like eons of development in UO too, since the Trammel split. You could even look at some of the things that they've implemented and how we could take those back to that fateful decision to double the world size and apply them there. So I don't know, for you or maybe the listeners who like aren't aware, at some point I think it's got to be Colin, maybe around Age of Shadows, I would imagine. That was when they did one of their first big item revamps, just the way that items and properties work. They came out with item insurance. a very common theme. They probably borrowed it from another game. And so if you took item insurance and said, okay, well, we're just going to leave this as a very hazardous world, but you can insure the items now that you don't want to lose to a thief in town or to a PvPer. And so that was a big problem too with the whole PvP thing, is that in Ultima Online, when you died, you were dry looted and everything was gone from your body. You got nothing back unless you made it back to your body and they didn't want something. But now all the items in your backpack have a computed value that you insure it for, and it's just deducted from your bank automatically. And as we all know, there's no money problems in UO anymore. So
No,
you can do that.
It could have been a way to monetize the game, right?
Yeah,
Further monetize the game.
Back. Yeah.
This is before microtransactions and all of that stuff, right? And still a monthly subscription fee and all of that. But, it could have been an extra thing, right? For your basic subscription, you have no insurance. For your premium plus subscription.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, get X amount of items to just, take care of. And they had item bless deeds. There was ways to, bless some things so they could just never be lost. So you just take that all the way back to, 2000, I think it was, 2001.
2003.
Was it really 2003?
No. Age of Shadows is 2003.
Yeah, the split happened before that, around the Renaissance time.
I thought we were still talking about the item thing, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, yeah. So let's take that one mechanic back to that decision and just see how that affects it. And Colin and I were actually talking about this today at work. How the devs will sometimes in UO, depending on which dev team you're talking about, because again, it's a million years old, they'll just do things sometimes without asking. And sometimes it's widely not what people want. And then a lot of times they do things where they have focus groups and they get feedback, which is just one, inconsistency in the history of Ultima Online that I think caused maybe some problems. Because I don't recall there being any betas or, real focus groups on like what the solution should be.
Yeah, I think that it dives into a deeper issue where, you look at some of the other popular MMOs and stuff like that, like where they have like their systems and then they rework them. And UO just seemed to like continuously expand upon systems. So like you look at with Age of Shadows, like where they released magical items and then they were releasing artifacts, and then suddenly we have like the crafting barbed kits and stuff like that to create armor, and then we have imbuing, and then now we've got a revamped artifact system where you can get random properties drops. And so like it's like an insane power creep, but there's never been like a reset to be like, all right, we're gonna reel this back a little bit, and then we'll see where we can go from there. It's not, as far as I know, it's not ever happened.
Well, I think part of that was because like Origin's development methodology was essentially squirrel.
Yeah, seemingly.
Isn't that sort of what they're doing? I'm just jumping in here. Sorry. Isn't that sort of what they're supposed to be doing with the new legacy thing?
But it's an impermanent thing, so it's going to be a seasonal thing where people can pop in. But I mean, like as far as like OSI, like the base game, I mean, we're not. I mean, maybe it's going to be a testing ground for them to try to do that. But like, how are you going to delete people's items that they have? I mean, like there's an infinite number of like rare items and rares and custom items that people have, and so like I don't know a way that you could really rein it back at this point, unless the only solution I could think of is something like what like RuneScape or World of Warcraft did, where they released like the old school server, which me and Scott were talking about, which a million people have asked for it like thousands and thousands of times. But I mean, I think that if they were to bring back like a Pub 16 server, then like it would vastly overtake the population. I mean, you look at people who pined for it playing like Outlands and UO Forever and stuff like that, and I mean, it would eventually eclipse what's happening inside of Atlantic server or Chesapeake or any of those other ones. So I mean, that would be the only way they could do a hard reset, is just to make a new world that doesn't have any history or items and stuff like that in it. But I mean, as far as to your point, is the it's an impermanent solution. It's a temporary thing. So, but I mean, like I said, it might be a testing ground for further change.
Yeah, I would hope so, because one thing, New Legacy, we don't really know what it is. All we really know is that it's bringing the season kind of fad to Ultima Online. Fortnite, Counter-Strike, Battlegrounds, Warzone, Call of Duty, they're all season. Diablo, we're already on season 2 or whatever. The season idea is coming. And so what other mechanics and things that they're doing in New Legacy is really yet to be seen. And unfortunately didn't get into the testing for that one.
Which I have conspiracy theories about.
Yes. If you're
You know-
listening, developers, a raffle stone was not a good idea.
I'm reminded of something that Bill Randolph said when we were talking about Ultima 9, and that's, that's in another podcast episode and the interviews on YouTube as well. But he was commenting about how, they were just struggling and struggling and struggling to get NPC pathfinding working. And he made the comment that, nowadays it would be child's play to, build the world that would work with NPCs, because you would just define non-walkable spaces.
Right.
But nobody had that idea at the time. That's kind of, it's that's something that I always try and keep in mind, when we have these speculative discussions, is
Yeah.
that, yes, that's entirely true, that they could do it that way, but maybe nobody had that idea at the time, because you can put, and I mean, the people at Origin were wickedly talented developers, no doubt, but you can still put a bunch of really, really smart people in a room looking at a problem, and it's like it's like that picture of, like the three cat bowls, and me, the dungeon master, setting up a nice easy puzzle solution, and then just like this tangle of cats that represents the players trying to solve it, right? You all seen that online? Sometimes what is the obvious solution, or what becomes the standard solution across the industry, after a bit of iteration, doesn't occur to, even the smartest people in the room sometimes.
Yeah, and you think about that, and obviously my ideas when we go back to the Trammel Feluca split, it's seated in ignorance. I have no idea what was going on at the time. And now, so Ultima Online, you're talking about just a few years after 100,000 subs, things are looking really great, right? They're probably like, because at that time, I don't know if you guys remember, but like if you came to the game in '98, housing was done, and you weren't getting one. And so they're probably thinking like, well, let's just double the world. We open up all of these housing spots. We don't have to design anything, except we'll change all the trees to being dead. And then, yeah, so they had basically poised themselves for what would eventually become a problem, and probably why I am kind of against the splitting idea, which is spreading everybody too thin again. Year after year after year, landmass after landmass after landmass with the dwindling population. In retrospect, I'm just like, man, did we really need to double, Trammel? They basically released Malice with Age of Shadows, and it was basically a facet for homes with 2 towns on it. And other than that, it is just a giant park for homes. But so yeah, they were probably thinking, population problems. We're gonna keep, sell, and people are gonna want homes. People buy homes. They play the game more. They want to, decorate everything. They need the money, and so let's just give them more room to do all that. And that makes perfect sense to me. Again, in retrospect, I would have opted for not doubling it, and maybe if you needed that, go the Malice route, and eventually you'll have another facet you could put homes in it. They would eventually go on to introduce Ilshanar and just not even allow housing on the whole facet, and that could have been a totally different story, because I know at one point they had planned on it, and boats were actually going to be usable there too, and I guess at launch they had just decided not to, and maybe that wasn't a direct result to the population. But yeah.
All right. Well, surely that can't have been the only controversial design decision.
No, I mean, I think there's a 100,000. So I think I've had this conversation with people as well. In fact, I think, Colin, we may have had that on yesterday or Friday. But basically, at some point, or at several points, I think during the life of a game, or even during the design phase, I truly believe that sometimes you have to not listen to people. And I think you have to go against maybe people's wishes. And I think I saw an
I think
issue.
that's most of the time.
Well, yeah. I mean, because it just depends, right? Because you'll have a lot of people that are talking, but you've got the silent majority or whatever. A lot of people are probably okay with the way things are, but then when people start getting very loud about their wants and needs, sometimes you got to focus on like who's saying this, what's the percentage, how's it going to really affect things. And when I think of what I'm really inching towards here is, I like my memories of UO with a high population. I really do. I love the memories of going after school to Brick Graveyard. I'm going to meet my buddy there. We don't even have ICQ. He's just there every day after school, and he's fighting in the graveyard, and we just go and we hang out. And I'm walking by the blacksmith, and there are tons of people just packed around the blacksmith, and there's 2 or 3 blacksmiths there that are repairing items for people so that they can go fight in the graveyard. And so that to me was incredible. I loved it. And when you had that kind of interaction, excuse me, you had to build a reputation, which is what they want you to build in New Legacy. So we'll see how they pull this off. They want you to build, a name for yourself, a legacy, and then allow you to transfer it to your home shard or whatever. But that one part right there, I think, is really important because Ultima Online did that unintentionally, and it was great. I had to know these people and trust them to give them my weapon, my silver vanquishing katana that I used to fight the undead. I had to give it to this guy, and he had to repair it and give it back. So he's got my money, and he's got my weapon, and he's got my trust. And I like that. I thought it was really cool. And then as the game evolved, I started to see that just get stripped away. And I didn't really know why. I saw repair deeds come into play. So now that blacksmith that used to make money by sitting at the blacksmith and using the blacksmith's anvil no longer needed to do that. I never had to see them again. I never had to know who they were ever again. I could just go buy their deed for 50 gold off of a vendor, double click on it near an anvil anywhere, and target my weapon, and it was fixed. It was magic, and it didn't make any sense, if in a world full of magic. And so I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. Because after that, every crafting station in Ultima Online had a population of 0. Unless it was one guy going to visit an NPC for a bulk order deed or something like that. Because there was just no reason to. I no longer had to trust anyone. I didn't know who they were. It was completely pointless. I just double clicked on a scroll, and my weapon was fixed as if they were actually just mages the whole time.
Except whenever Terramur came out, because then they had the Souls Forge there that had a bonus.
Oh, I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get to that. So
quit skipping ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and please, good interjection. Feel free to. But I guess what I was really getting at is that they started moving people into their homes, and they just had to do stuff in their homes. And so they made anvils placeable in your home, and they made they made those repair deeds craftable by just being, I think next to one. You didn't have to even go to the blacksmith anymore. And so I just didn't like that because it spread people out. Everyone was at their home crafting these things, or at their home repairing their stuff, or they just went and bought it off a vendor, and then they went to an anvil at a store and they just double clicked it and left. And so you took out the interaction, which was the whole cool thing. You brought a bunch of people on the internet together. Let's see what they do. That's an MMO. That's what Ultima Online was. And then so they took that whole part away. Okay, now the people aren't together anymore. So it's just a bunch of people playing a single player game. And they did this time and time again. So Terramur, like Alan just said, came out. It was awesome. They finally did it again. And this time they did it super right. They had the Soul Forge for imbuing. And they had only one in the entire game. And they put it in the heart of the new Gargoyle City, and it was awesome. It was packed every day. People were imbuing left and right, and selling imbuing ingredients at this place. Commerce was happening. People were talking again. You didn't necessarily need to know who anybody was because no one was really providing a service directly to you, but it was a lot cooler. And then they made Soul Forges placeable in homes, and that town's a ghost town. No one's there. Nobody goes to Terramur anymore. Because they took the one item that existed in one place in the game and brought people together, and they let anyone put a 1 tile by 1 tile version of it in their house.
Well, it's technically a rare drop, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's not going to be hard to
Can you explain the importance of this to those like me that are rather ignorant about this?
Yeah.
See, I come at this from a very unique perspective. Most of my life, I've been a single player Ultima fan. For years, I thought of Evo as that game that destroyed Ultima 9. And so, but really this year, over the past year, I've, my experience has changed almost 100% on the game. I appreciate it for what it is. There's some things that I think lore-wise don't work for it. But that's a whole other conversation that I'd like to get into if we have time. But see if you can explain a little bit more about what you're saying for my sake.
So yeah, they whenever they released, was it Stygian Abyss was one of the expansions they came out with in 2009 or 10, I can't remember. And it introduced the Stygian Abyss dungeon, but also it introduced a new skill that was supposed to coincide along with crafting called imbuing, and you would get some gems like some rubies and stuff like that. You would get some essences, and then you would get a secondary ingredient if you wanted to like have a very strong property, like the max that you could get for like, you know, your damage increase or whatever. You would have a variety of secondary ingredients that you would get from the area around Terramore or inside of the Stygian Abyss, and you would use those, or you would level up your imbuing skill, and then you would be able to take a piece of armor and then be able to imbue properties on it, like damage increase or resistances or you know, mana increase, stuff like that. Yeah.
So basically, it's like the equivalent of gem slots in equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. Yeah, like the item system. The item system existed that had all these properties on them, like rings would have, you know, damage increase or like hit chance increase, stuff like that. But they would all be like sort of random. And then there's artifacts that had static properties, like every single, like there was one called the Gladiator's Collar that Sarah wore forever. And it had like damage increase or something on it, which was a rare property for like a gorget, a neck piece. And but so yeah, there was artifacts that had static properties. Then there were randomly generated properties on items that you would get from monsters, and then you could use certain crafting runic items to like randomly generate strong properties onto armor. But imbuing was the first time that we could get exactly what you want on a piece of armor. So it was just sort of like a simplification, but you couldn't get like nearly as strong as if you were to try to roll it randomly. But obviously you would burn through tons of money trying to, you know, get exactly what you want.
It solved a real problem, and like he said, where you could be a mage, and here you've got this amazing ring. It's got faster casting +1. It's got lower mana cost max. It's got lower reagent cost, and then it also has stealthing +10. And you're like, ugh, what a waste. And it just gave you an opportunity to fix that. But the place where you went to forge was the Soul Forge, which is basically like a blacksmith forge, but more magical, right? But it was in one spot, and it brought people together. And you could do, so there were two. You had the base one in the town that you could gather around and use, and then you could do a quest for the Gargoyle Queen. You could go use hers and get a little bit of a bump. And sometimes I believe people will still go there if they're going to do something really risky, but like most people have, you know, 120, and they're just fine just sitting in their house and doing it now.
120 being the skill cap for the skill.
Yeah, sorry. But so I don't want to just complain, but you know, how would I solution it? And I don't think I really need a solution for the Soul Forge problem. Just don't do it. Don't make it a thing that you can place in your house. Don't do it. It's very easy. I want to
complain.
Oh, we can go further down that rabbit hole, because like with some of the recent veteran rewards that you can get. So every like 12 months you unlock like, or every month, or no, it's every 12 months you get of subscription, you get like 2 veteran rewards, and you can redeem those to get like an item or what else can you use? Just like mounts and stuff like that. And so they released
all items, maybe titles now.
Yeah, title, or maybe I can't remember. But anyways, yeah, most people use them on the items, and they're worth a good chunk of like in-game money. The rewards themselves, if you sell them to the right person. But there's things like Tinker's stations now. There's like a whole like automatic like hammer forge thing, and you can take like smithing hammers which have charges on them that you would use to craft items. So like say like you have like a blacksmith's hammer has 80 charges. You can just make a bunch of those with tinkering, and then you can just throw them all into like the automatic hammer forge. And so suddenly you have an item in your house that's placeable that can suddenly make like 8,000 items. So you can just sit there and auto train on a new account and get it from like 1 to 100 without having to stop, except to like empty your inventory and stuff like that if you become like over encumbered. So yeah, it's gotten to where it's very easy mode. I remember sitting in Kimmy's house for like 2 weeks straight trying to like get to 100 blacksmithing, and then 120 later on. It took forever. Thankfully I had very rich friends at Ultima.
I want to put one quick thing into real quick, because the first thing that I mentioned was the blacksmiths. And I think that if they were really trying to solve a problem, which I felt like didn't exist, but maybe it did, and it was items being taken or stolen or, issues between people, I still think there's a much easier solution, and that's just to make your weapons repairable in the trade window. Just have them put the money in. The condition is the item gets repaired, and they do it, and the transaction's complete. And if it didn't fit the current trade window, then just make another trade window for repairs. It wouldn't be hard.
World of Warcraft did something similar to that whenever you wanted to, if you wanted somebody to enchant something for you or gem slot something. I think that they made a smaller window below the 6 items, whatever you can trade in WoW. I can't remember.
Perfect.
Yeah. And then you can make it a condition like, hey, they're going to apply this as part of your trade. And on your end, you would put up gold or whatever it was. And then you would both hit select or accept, and then it would make the transaction happen.
To me, that's exactly the right answer. Keep the player interaction there. And if there was a security issue before, then let's take care of it that way. I don't think you should just completely, put the blacksmith out of business.
Or heck, it could have been folded into the item insurance concept, right?
I'm fine with it. Yeah.
So one thing. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, it's fundamentally the same problem. But anyways, go on.
I was going to comment on the stuff earlier concerning the nature of UO. I think it's tied intricately to the nature of early internet. So here's something interesting. So I've been playing on a free server called Siege Perilous. That it goes. It was an official server, whatever. You guys be able to connect, confirm or deny.
Yeah, so if you're playing on a free shard, then Siege Perilous and Mugden are the American and Japanese versions of the hardcore server for UO. They're both still running.
Okay, yeah. So that's basically the guy who started this. He goes by the name Adam Ant or whatever. Had this one named Angel Island.
Really? Yeah,
it's a different one. So this is kind of a fork off of that, and it was actually pretty successful earlier this year. I think they would have 200 or 300 people at once on the server, which is pretty unique. That's pared down now. I think what I typically see is about 30 online. But one thing I've thought of too is I get the sense with some of the things on that server and some of the people on there, I was like, I get on there sometimes, I feel like, well, this is where the internet went to die, because it's no matter who you are, no matter how you view it, the internet that we have now is not the internet that we had, pre-2015. It was, look at this, right?
Rothbard, you may be having a connection issue. Is it just me?
Oh, am I? No,
I was just messaging you about it.
Okay.
Yeah, you're kind of roboting out a little bit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
From time to time.
Oh, good. I thought it was just my end.
I did too.
Wow. Okay. Well, I may have an internet problem that I need to call in about. Anyway, but if I keep doing it, y'all just shut me up and I'll be quiet. But
go ahead. I can hear.
But I will say, Siege Perilous has changed my view on PvP. So before this, I was like, nah, I hate PvP, can't stand it or anything. Which again, I'm not an MMO guy. I'm a single player guy. But for some reason, I don't know if it's the rule set or the setup of Siege Perilous, it feels like what you would think early UO would be. It's not. One of the reasons I hate most of the free servers is they have so much souped up, custom art and things like that, custom things. But the problem is you get on there, it doesn't look like Ultima. It doesn't look like anything I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about it is, Ultima Online and Ultima 9, you had the same art director. That's why those two games look very, very similar. The same kind of look. And I love the look of original Ultima, the Ultima Online. Well, original Ultima anyway. But so that look of the pre-rendered 3D touched up with 2D. Of course, that goes back to Ultima 8, right? And they incorporated tons of items visually from Ultima 8 into Ultima Online. But that's part of why I enjoy playing on it. Now, there's been some other things that just first time I got seriously PK'd in Despise, pretty annoying, and it kind of makes you stand up and be like, but at the same time, you get past that eventually. Once it happened And it's kind of like, okay, I can see how there's a way to play this game that it kind of caters to that. But I don't know. There's another aspect, and maybe this is just a totally different point. I really think that early UO, they really should have pulled in more from the single player series in terms of the lore. There should have been, and this is another problem, I think, and again, going back in history and everything, but they should have had concurrent single player games to complement the online portion, that they could reference one another, and they would build, and then you would have this fan base that I think would grow in a bigger way, and you wouldn't have all this ignorance about the single player series from the online ones, and vice versa. Maybe you wouldn't have as much hatred toward Ultima Online as some single player people have had before. So I mean, that to me, that would be interesting. Supposedly the original UO is somewhere between what, Ultima 4, Ultima 5?
No, the original. So like the Ultima, like the OSI Origin, UO that launched in '97 actually takes place right after the event of Ultima 1.
Okay.
And so the whole intro video to Ultima Online is the stranger who is not the avatar.
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets mundane. So they said it in the Ultima 1 verse. But one thing that I would say to kind of your point is, I agree. I think that would be awesome. The single players lining up with the actual game. I think that would be incredible. One thing that I thought made Ultima Online really amazing, though, for me, was that I had all this single player build up to it, and now I get to live in that world. So I thought that was cool from my perspective. But I did want to say that, like, as someone who's played it the entire time, I think I liked the Ultima 1 setting, because they really did like kind of go single player game by single player game with a lot of the expansions. Not all of them. Some of them were totally ad hoc to appease the Japanese community or whatever Mundane's legacy was. I'm not really sure. But like, you've got the Stygian Abyss expansion, you've got a Savage Empire expansion, and a lot of things have been kind of inkling towards like an Ultima, or I'm sorry, an Ultima 8 pagan. Pagan things have been kind of sprinkling themselves in the lore and in the items lately, and I have a feeling that there's going to be some sort of a pagan expansion or event arc, and a lot of the event arcs have a lot of Ultima 7 feel. So a lot of the events that led up to like Stygian Abyss were very much like Ultima 7. In fact, actually, as far as Ultima 7 goes, there was a whole Fellowship event arc. I don't think it actually came with any expansions, but the Fellowship is much, alive in UO right now too, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Interesting, because I mean, again, too, it's not like I have no previous experience with UO. Back in the 2000s, there was a fan server. Used to call them shards, right? Free shards. Originally called Ultima Dragons Ultima Online, later called Ultima Legacy. Did you guys ever play on that?
No, the only free shard I ever really played was Angel Island, and just a couple of roleplay ones just for testing.
Yeah, so Ultima Legacy was basically a hard RP server that was very much like, we're in Britannia, no silly names, no punny names and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that too, like, in my experience with Siege Perilous, it is kind of hard to do like hard RP when someone comes up to you that's named, Bunny 359. Not I'm just throwing something out there. That's not an actual player. But you get what I mean? It's like, Here I am, Rothbard, this mighty paladin, and I'm going to try to talk to Cube Squared. What? And but so like the server, back to that server, the people that ran it tooled it very strictly, for better or worse, to follow the lore. So what they did actually, when you got on there, it's a timeline of the single player games, meaning the avatar has left for the Serpentile with the companions, and now you're a player in Britannia at this time. So that's why the avatar is not there. That's why Dupre and YOLO are not in the world. And then they did a number of different events. Some of it sounded like fan fiction. They used I think they used the Second Age as the lands of danger and despair, and they did like a time travel thing where you had to fight Mondane's brother or whatever. But there were some other things. Exodus tried to reinvade Britannia and things like that. A lot of it was really fun from a single player perspective, but they, as I remember, they did strictly monitor PvP. Like, it was not very. Another thing I really loved about it too, though, a thing I wish that other servers had, you had wildlife out in the wilderness, and the wildlife was basically the monsters. You didn't have trolls wandering out in most places, I should say. It felt a little more natural that way. It felt a little bit more like Ultima 7, meaning you're coming up against an alligator and you can't just go right by it. But there were some little things I really loved about that server, and I wish that someone would make something like that now. But it's a lot of work, I think. Just the little that I've looked at it, it's a lot of work to make your own server.
Yeah, well, it's not hard to make a server, spin up and log in, but if you want to make code changes or make it your server, yeah, it's a job for sure. I have a question for you though. So when you were talking earlier about like kind of getting over and not really being too bothered by the PvP aspect in, I guess it was Siege?
Yeah,
right?
Siege Perilous.
Why was that?
Well, okay, so I think it just happened enough that I just sort of accepted. And really, a big part of it initially was, and everybody was kind of saying, well, what you need to do is just join a guild. And so what I eventually actually did was, I didn't really want to join any of the guilds that were on there because none of them were really lore accurate. You've got some orc factions, and you've got an undead faction, and you've got the U militia there, which I guess I could, I was kind of leaning on joining them, but then I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
You know what? And I talked to one of the devs there. I was like, can I just start the Order of the Silver Serpent? Is that okay? And they were like, sure. And everybody was like really positive, like, hey, it's good to have paladins on the server and everything. So that's more or less what I did. I started a Discord server for the first time. Kenneth was very, very helpful in helping me do that. But it's not been, I've tried very hard. I don't want to devote my life to it. So I don't do a whole bunch of events. It's actually really whittled down to maybe 4 or 5 regular guildmates in there. And we just kind of hang around and we, go make gold and things like that. And we try to do hard RP, but it's not, again, you kind of take what you can get. If people want to RP with me, that's fine. What I don't understand is the people that are just irrationally against RP, that just can't seem to stand it. And I think they can't seem to stand it because they don't feel like they can do it. But that's okay. And I tell people, like, you don't have to do this. I'm just making I'm doing the full like Ultima Elizabethan, these and thous, and I'm going full bore with it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so I think really creating that guild, that kind of helped because you've got a group of people working on it rather than just you by yourself out there. It is a game that's designed very much for you to have associations and talk to people. And so, and really, yeah, there have been some people on there that I've just been looking at. It's like, yeah, this guy, he's not the coolest guy I can think of. And, maybe I don't appreciate the way some of the people act on there. I don't.
You're roboting just a little bit.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying I can choose who I want to spend my time with or not, Yeah. And so I think that's kind of been part of, and really the big thing is not carrying around everything that's valuable to me. Like carrying around stuff that, if I'm going out to the wilderness or going out to a dungeon, I'm going to get some stuff that's on me, equip my character with stuff that I'm willing to lose.
Yeah. See, yeah, and what Ultima has really made me to date is I'm a very weird build character that pretty much carries his entire life in his backpack, and when I die, I probably lose like $1 million in insurance. I carry everything around because I can now, and maybe that's a problem. But and there's another thing in UO that they have now too, which also could kind of go all the way back to the the PvP Worlds thing, was Bag of Sending. That was just a bag you basically had that ran on magic powder that I don't think people crafted. I'm not sure where the powder comes from, but you just double click it, and if there's something in your backpack, is it really? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, you just click an item in your backpack and send it to the bank.
As long as it's not cursed.
Yeah, curses.
But I can see what you said earlier about, like, I think at the time, because that's the other, and into any kind of UO until the 2000s, and I learned through Ultima Dragons and some other forums I was on that, like, oh, there's some fans that are making a serious like hard RP server that they want to stick to Ultima lore and all that. Like, that was interesting to me at the time, but I just didn't. And really, like, in hindsight, knowing now that the dev team for Ultima was yanked off of that project to work on Ultima Online, I still have some aspects of that where, like, I'll be playing Ultima Online and I'll imagine, like, hey, what if Ultima 9 had looked like this? What if, and for your sake, Kenneth, I don't, not to trash your beloved Ultima 9, but I still tend to think that Ultima 9 would likely have been maybe not a revolutionary product, but it may have been a better product. I really think that's what Ultima needed. After Ultima 8, they needed an Ultima that would come back around and pull things back together. And Ultima 9 wasn't really that. As revolutionary as it was, as far as before its time as it was, and I still have a chip on my shoulder about that, I would say.
Well, while we're throwing bombs here, let me throw one. What if, and maybe, I don't know if this is a rabbit hole that's worth diving down, but, it could be a thing that we talk about, or another design decision that is curious, at least to me, right? Because why didn't UO go 3D? And I mean, like, I don't want to, get into the rabbit hole of, like, well, they have, like, now they've, gone away from, like, the sprite art and it was 3D rendered and then interpolated to 2D. And I'm talking about, no, like, there was an actual, like, 3D client that the community absolutely, like, crapped on when it was released. And I mean, there is technically, the Kingdom Reborn client, or the enhanced client. That's what it was. The KR client was the KR client was the original 3D client, and then the enhanced client was kind of the hacked down version of that.
Don't listen to your player base. That would have solved that issue.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that was a thing too, where because at the end of the day, I mean, maybe you're right, maybe you're not. I don't know. I mean, I certainly think that, I don't know if I necessarily agree with the conclusion that an isometric Ultima 9 would have been a better Ultima 9 overall, but I do think that a better Ultima 9 would have resulted if there hadn't been so much turbulence in the development team, in the constant rewriting of the plot, in the, and in the constant shifting of the technology, right?
Agreed.
The problem with U9 was just the constant uncertainty and the constant shifting that happened throughout its development. And so, yeah, would it have been a, quote, better, unquote, game? I don't discount the possibility if it had a more stable development overall. And yet, at the same time, I look at those old isometric screenshots from the early Ultima 9 builds and what little glimpse of that we got, and I don't think it would have aged half as well as Ultima 9 has, in the form that we got it. And that is another problem that I see with UO, is that, you look at UO and it was revolutionary in its day and for a number of years afterwards, but it does look like a game from the mid-late 90s, which, fine, if you're catering exclusively to an audience of mid-late 90s gamers and people who have, that odd retro enthusiasm for that era. But I can't help but wonder what would have happened if Ultima 9 had made attempts to modernize its tech base and, evolve itself beyond 2D and into 3D, and what it would look like today and what the player base would look like today as a result.
You mean Ultima Online?
Yeah, exactly.
Ultima Online. Okay.
So I mean, I think that a lot of the identity of UO is in because even like the enhanced client now, like I wasn't around when Kingdom Reborn client was a thing, but like it had a very distinct and sort of odd look. Like I exclusively play in the enhanced client now, just because of all the macroing. It's just too powerful not to. But like this has a very distinct look, and I don't think that it's the look of the game is the problem. It's definitely an accessibility. I watched like maybe a 20 or 30 minute video of people who had never or hadn't played UO before, or hadn't played it in a very, very, very long time, and they were just like, "What's the new player experience like?" And the problem is that there isn't one. There's humongous gaps in knowledge. Like the documentation that UO provides is not spectacular. The biggest resource of knowledge you can have is a website called UO Guide, which is player run, and it relies on players to update the information with what changes from patch to patch and stuff like that. And so there's just a huge gap in like what's being provided to you as a new player. So like it's gonna scare anybody off from the get-go, because they're like, it took the guys that were playing it, I think, like 5 to 10 minutes to figure out how to equip a weapon. Because like if you have a sword in your inventory and you double click it, which you would think would equip it to you, no, that's how you carve skin off of a deer that you killed. So
yeah, that's use, right? And I mean, like, I know that because I've played Ultima 7 and Ultima 6, so I understand that that's how, that's a holdover from mid-90s Origin GUMP-based interactivity, Of course,
yeah,
that's how you
use
would use
of
an
great
object.
stuff like that in the game. Like I recently somebody sent me some files to replace the trees in the client that I'm playing on. Like there's a lot of things you can do with your local client just to change the look of the game if you want to switch up the art files or whatever. So they sent me a file of like the original Ultima Online trees. And he liked them better because it's just more variety in how they look and the colors. So that it was interesting because I looked at it, I was like, oh, trees. That is the next logical step up. Like that is just boom, move up into the next stage of things. And I really do really feel like the jump to where we went with Ultima 9 was maybe just a step too far. And I think, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's one of the things that is fascinating about the game to me is, finding and seeing all these things like, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. I know what that is. But then sadly, everybody playing around me has no idea. Most of the people playing around me have no idea. And so I feel like I can kind of serve in this, I could serve, but I can be in this spot where I'm someone who knows about the single player games, say, hey, this and that and this and that. Some people are like, oh, but that doesn't mean they're going to necessarily go back and play the single player games though. But anyway.
There you go. So, I mean, I guess like when I think about the look of like UO, and when I talk about like moving it into 3D, I'm thinking about things like, for a while there at least, there was what was it called? Iris, Ultima Iris.
Yeah.
And but then there was also somebody made that Unity based. There's somebody who's like tooling around with like a Unity based client for UO as well. And I mean, I do get the appeal of like the nostalgic look and feel, but at the same time, I can kind of understand that I get nostalgic about certain things, but like at the same time, I want my big like problem is that I get to wanting, and in many respects, like U9 as we got it is kind of emblematic of this. I want I love Ultima 6. And I want to be able to have the experience of like an Ultima 6, but in a Skyrim kind of world, right? Which, I mean, Ultima 9 is still probably one of the closest examples of that because, it didn't have a party system. It didn't have NPC schedules, but, it had that interactivity. It had that open world that just kind of all flowed together. It had a lot of the hallmarks of like what I want in a game based on growing up playing Ultima, starting from Ultima 6, but moving the visuals forward into 3D. And I guess like Baldur's Gate 3 would be an example of that now, or Divinity Original Sin 2 before it, right, where the world is quite interactive. If you are willing to mess around with it, you can do a lot that you're probably not intended to by the developers. But at the same time, it's got those current gen or next gen visuals, and my big thing is, at the end of the day, I kind of recognize that the tech moves on, and the expectations of the audience moves on. And it would have been kind of cool, I think, if UO could have somehow found a way to keep pace with that. And I'm inspired by like some of these Ultima fan projects now that try to take the game data files and then interpolate them through a modernized engine, whether that's Unity or like Anthony Salter's using his own homemade Geist engine to do it now, right? To
Cool.
bring Ultima 7 into 3D. Um, but, so that you could still experience the game classically if you wanted to. But then there was also the opportunity to experience it in this much more visually enhanced kind of way. Not just a reskin of a client, but an actual holy man, like now I'm wandering around the world and it's in full 3D and I can look up and I can look down and I can all of that stuff. I don't know if I'm pipe dreaming, but like I think that the ill reception of the KR client, especially, which was that first attempt to move the game towards 3D, and then the subsequent even more negative reception of like what we saw of UO2, UXO. I think that really killed any chance of UO moving in that direction, which is, I think, unfortunate.
So I was sort of edging toward this. I never finished my train of thought earlier when I was talking about like the identity of UO is what it is, but I don't think that like player bases don't. I don't think that it's necessary because, and I'm going to use a different MMO that sort of exemplifies this is like RuneScape, which I don't know if any of you have ever played before, but like they made a huge jump where they went to like this new combat system that's like very WoW style, like you hit 1 2 3 to like use your abilities and stuff, and the all of the aesthetic of it was completely revamped to like all of the animations were changed to be smoother and have like more frames, but then the community was just like, oh, we hate this. And then there was a big resurgence where they were like, okay, well, we're going to release like an old school RuneScape, which is going to take it back to 2007. And that one has like very clunky, like it's capped out at like, I don't even know, like 30 frames or something ridiculous like that. And like everything's very clunky looking and awful. It looks like it was built in 2007 because that's when it was. And that it has more players than like what they call RuneScape 3 now, which is like the current, like the modern version of RuneScape. And like so I don't think that it's I don't think it's necessary 100% to maybe modernize the look of UO. I think that just taking like what we spoke about earlier is that like all that power creep that's happened over the last 5 years is just it's too much, and there's too much information there for anyone new to come in and be able to like assimilate well into the environment that UO has at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, I think that's an issue with a lot of long-running MMOs, right? And I mean, to be fair, like you mentioned UO Guide, and other MMOs have similar fan communities that have been established, right? Where they step up to sort of help guide new players in. At least you hope they will. But yeah, UO definitely it's a learning cliff.
So
yeah, it's definitely a canyon.
Oh yeah, it's hitting a brick wall for sure, and then scratching your way up if you don't have a friend.
But the amazing thing I've learned in the past year has been I can just around in full armor, and that's what I can find. I'm going to win.
Yeah. You probably have like
a week. It'll probably take you a week before you can even fight like an Etten or something like that.
Well, I mean,
even knowing how to train.
I'm talking PvP primarily.
Oh
like,
yeah, no,
with PvP, no like you're dead with that. Like you need the term I keep hearing is Dexer. You need to be a Dexer. And you need potions, and you need wands, and you need stuff that will turn the tables. And that's what people gravitate toward, right? I mean, it's the deathmatch thing. Like, why did people love Doom? Because you could get online with your friends and talk trash at them and kill them, in a game, and or whatever. And so it's the same kind of appeal, I think. It doesn't appeal to me per se, but really, like, again, what I've done is I've tried to adapt.
I think another thing too. So a couple of things in like regards to what Kim was saying is, you remember saying that like maybe the technology wasn't there or it was different at the time, and so decisions were made or whatever. And at first I was thinking, well, maybe the problem was that UO didn't have much of an iterative life cycle. So that when changes did happen, they were met with a lot of resistance because people did build up those feelings. Like, you don't find a lot of people that are nostalgic from UO from the Charter Edition MIDI sound files. Because the music in that game has many iterations throughout its life cycle. Just from going from MIDIs in '97
Don't get
to
me started.
MP3s. So people were exposed to change a lot more in that regard, but they never really did anything iterative to the game engine or the way that it rendered graphics. You draw something, you have to draw it in 3 different directions if it's even supports direction, blah blah blah. And so that did kind of help people build up that nostalgia for the 2D client. And you think about 3D though, this is they say in game design 3D is hard, right? So you just added a whole other dimension to my life, man. Whoa. And so like back then, if you guys remember talking to our good UO developer friend, when this game came out, it didn't have a database. It chunked everything to a file and it parsed it at server up. And that's how everything was done. Like I remember when UO announced that they were moving to Oracle database, I thought they were migrating from SQL or something. I'm pretty sure they were migrating from a text file saved on a file system somewhere. And so I just feel like maybe in the rush to make Ultima Online with the hype that it got after the beta, they're just like, we got to get this thing out, and then graphical iterations were just hard. Maybe 3D was just too hard, because now in Unity the vector math, the matrix mathematics is very much abstracted away from you, and we want to start doing 3D stuff in 1998 or 9, probably just a lot harder then. To really get that kind of iterative development to where people wouldn't have resisted so much if it had kind of gone through a linear evolution, because that's what killed, or never killed. Well, Kingdom Reborn died for sure, but like this, you look what replaced it. You have a lot of uproar from the 2D people. Again, they're loud. I don't know how many of them there really are, but they were loud about Kingdom Reborn. And I love the enhanced client. I like the way it looks and the way it plays. But it is largely 2D assets. Even when they did Kingdom Reborn, it was still 3D meshes rendered in frames. They never could actually just put a 3D thing in Ultima Online, and I don't know why, but they wouldn't do it. I remember talking to LaRoshan, one of the developers, at a town hall, and he explained. This guy was great. You get him talking, he tell you things you weren't supposed to know. It was awesome. But he was like, yeah. We just don't do it. We do everything in high res 3D, very high resolution textures, and everything's tessellated, very round, and then we chunk it down real small and we take JPEGs of it, and that becomes your game. It's like, okay.
You're making me twitch.
Yeah.
I mean, I do, and I do remember like Richard said that when I spoke to him about U9, Bill said that as well. Like 3D definitely does complexify the heck out of everything, especially when it comes to object interactivity and maintaining persistence of 3D objects, because it is just that much more complicated to store. Okay, X and Y. Now you're adding Z. That actually does add a tremendous amount of complexity, and especially if you're doing it in a database, then now you're adding like, it's not as easy as just adding a column to a table. That's the start. So. And I do get that. Like I say, I'm just kind of more thinking of, I think maybe the impression I'm getting is that, and maybe this is true of a lot of development, is that, UO was just very much all the development. These were decisions that were made in the moment, responding to the momentary needs of the game. And there wasn't a lot of thought given to, how to future-proof it, which is kind of weird given that, it came out of a very forward-thinking moment in Origin's history. But then
it's a very intricate running. It's a very intricate game from the get-go, though. There's a whole lot of moving parts in it. And I don't pretend to understand it all, but like you read and hear about the stories of how intricate they were trying to make the nature system and how crazy that went with like, bunnies becoming super bunnies, things like that.
Yeah, and people murdering everything because they wanted to train, hunting skills.
And then the dragons coming down and raiding the villages because the food supply in the forest was gone.
Yeah. Which sounds super cool, but I can also understand why it didn't really work in it as something that could keep going in that way.
Because people are jerks and they find ways to break things.
Yeah, it's one of the great experiments, right? And
keeps me employed.
yeah.
One note about the music, I will say, I hate hearing the Ultima 9 tracks in Ultima Online. I have to go into the files and say, nope, I want the original MIDI files, and you can get them high quality MP3, and you can there's a config text file in there where you can edit what track plays where. Now I don't exactly know what all the locations are, but I've done that myself, and I much prefer the original soundtrack myself.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie,
because it feels like, and again, it feels like another iteration. You had Ultima 7, you had Ultima 8, and then you move on, and it feels like the next logical step. The feel of it is, again, like everything else, the art, the look, the feel of the game, very, very unique. And again, I'll say again, Ultima 9 has its good things. I think the soundtrack is one of the best things about Ultima 9, but I don't think it really works outside of that context. I think, to me, I don't know, there's just something about, to me, like it pulls something away from Ultima Online. I'm like, this just doesn't work for me.
Sad fact for me, as an enhanced client player, I don't believe you can do that. I used to do that in the 2D client all the time. I just swapped the files out. The 2D client used to just natively take the MIDIs from my Charter edition and play them.
Oh, nice.
It may not do that now. You might have to do MP3s. But yeah, in the enhanced client, I'm pretty sure that their sound files are just wrapped into a custom, probably an MYP or whatever they got out of the Gamebryo engine. It's all wrapped up in data files now. You can't easily just swap out your music folder, and it breaks my heart a little bit.
There were little, I'm thinking too about some of the mechanics of the shard I played back in the 2000s, Ultima Legacy. You could take a pile of gold and double click it, and you would flip a coin. Was that in any of the other? Was that on OSI or any of the other?
No, never.
Because that just little interactivity points like that's really cool to me.
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, because you can in Ultima Online there are sprites for 1 gold, I think 3 gold, and then I think once you hit 6 gold, it turns into the pile.
Right.
So it'd be very cool if you.
But I mean, even like a pile of gold. I just remember you double click it and the text would pop up over it and saying you flip a coin, it turns up heads or tails. It would do like a 50% chance.
Well, that's
it already had
right there.
Yeah, it already had tons of stuff like that to start with. I tried to talk to the guy over the Seed Perilous shard and be like, hey, try to put more of this stuff in. Interactivity stuff. There's not a whole lot of interest in the Ultima lore stuff for a lot of the people on there. But the good thing is it's a server that looks like, you don't have art that's like weird and out of place. You're in Britannia. You kind of know where everything is. The rule set is punishing, but I don't really care about winning everything I need. I don't care to have a castle or whatever anyway. But yeah, so like, for example, like entry level, like smallest house you can get, 1 room little cottage or whatever. I think they're priced about 480,000 gold. So like that's, from the start, that kind of ups that. And I think that's benefited the server in the sense that you don't have people popping up houses everywhere because the price is already pretty steep.
Yeah, Soda did a good job with that with the tax system, just to have lots and stuff. Hey, as a fellow double clicker fan in Ultima Online, are you aware that there's cow tipping?
No.
So unless they did something weird on your server, native to Ultima Online is cow tipping. If you find a cow out in the woods, you double click it. Something may not happen, but don't feel bad. Just keep double clicking at a cow. It will eventually start mooing and fall over.
I will try that.
Enjoy.
Got there's a Barracoon over at Humility.
Barracoon where?
Humility.
I'm totally down.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, but I know I, for my part, have to wrap it up.
Yeah, it was a good hour. 7 minutes over. That was a good convo. I enjoyed it a lot.
I have a feeling this is a very untapped, not adequately tapped vein at all, but that's okay.
would have loved to have Tim here for some thoughts. Maybe we'll do a retrospective on this one another time. But yeah, very good conversation.
Right. Well, thanks for all your time, gents. And cool. Yeah, we'll have to talk about this again.
All right. See you in Britannia.
Thanks. Take care.
If you'd like to join the Ultima Dragons, you can do so at udic.org, where you can select your very own dragon name and get added to the official roster of the Ultima Dragons. You can also find them on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/Ultima Dragons. You can follow them on Twitter, twitter.com/Ultima Dragons. Or you can find them on Discord or the Weremount if you're feeling particularly old school. Links for both of those are in the show notes. If you would like to support the podcast, you can do so on Patreon, patreon.com/Ultima Codex. We also now are accepting support via Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com/Ultima Codex. And also Buy Me a Coffee, buymeacoffee.com/Ultima Codex. You can like Ultima on Facebook, facebook.com/The Ultima Series. And you can follow at Ultima Codex on Twitter or now on Instagram. And as always, this episode of Spam, Spam, Spam Humbug has been brought to you by our Patreon backers.